Standing in the kitchen of a small bakery in Boston, Elizabeth Brown carefully piped buttercream frosting. The morning light streamed through the window, gently illuminating her handiwork. Over the past 5 years, Elizabeth had been making a name for herself as a respected local pastry chef. Her specialty was wedding cakes. Ironically, the one she was finishing today was for her own wedding. Elizabeth had always been a meticulous and responsible woman. Raised as the eldest daughter, she had always worked diligently to meet the expectations of her parents, Martha and George. She served as student council president in high school and graduated at the top of her culinary school class. Her parents were proud of her. Her smartphone rang, and Michael's name appeared on the screen. Elizabeth answered with a smile. "How's the cake coming along?" Michael's voice had its usual warmth. "It's perfect. I'm sure you'll love it." Michael Johnson was the head chef at a popular local restaurant. They had met 2 years ago when he was a judge at a cooking competition. He was an honest and dependable man. Their relationship began with a shared passion and gradually deepened. Michael's gentle nature and considerate heart perfectly matched Elizabeth's steady character, and when he proposed a year ago, she had no hesitation. After hanging up, Elizabeth sighed deeply. 3 days until the wedding. But now that her relationship with her family had fallen apart, her heart was filled with complicated emotions. Elizabeth's mind conjured up the face of her sister, Victoria. Victoria had always been given special treatment by their parents. Beautiful and sociable from a young age, she was skilled at attracting attention, but she also had a capricious and self-centered side. From childhood, Elizabeth had been expected to look after Victoria. She helped with homework, mediated when Victoria got into trouble with friends, and sometimes even covered up her lies. Instead of scolding Victoria, their parents always indulged her, saying, "She's still young." Looking back, that might have been the beginning of the family's distortion. Elizabeth was always expected to be the good child, while Victoria was forgiven for everything. Elizabeth never voiced her complaints about such unfairness. She always suppressed her own feelings to maintain family peace. Meeting Michael was a turning point in Elizabeth's life. He recognized and respected her worth. His family also warmly welcomed her, giving her the first sense of what a real family meant. Wedding preparations were going smoothly. The venue was booked, invitations sent, and the dress chosen. But one big decision remained: whether to invite her sister Victoria. As her relationship with Michael deepened, Elizabeth gradually distanced herself from her family. She hadn't realized it herself, but it might have been an unconscious defense mechanism to protect herself. Knowing Victoria's behavior patterns, Elizabeth couldn't believe that she would genuinely be happy for her. And her intuition was right. After the engagement announcement, while Victoria outwardly offered congratulations, flames of jealousy burned in her eyes. Elizabeth tried to ignore it. However, events progressed in a direction far beyond her imagination. On a rainy night, Victoria visited Elizabeth's apartment and made a confession that would forever change her life. From that day on, Elizabeth made the painful decision not to invite her sister to the wedding. And now, as the price of that decision, she had been cut off from her entire family. Her parents, Martha and George, condemned Elizabeth without hearing her reasons, declaring that she was no longer family. They even urged relatives to skip the wedding, trying to completely isolate Elizabeth. As she finished the cake, tears welled up in Elizabeth's eyes. The day after tomorrow at the wedding, the family seats would be empty. Yet she had no regrets. She was prepared to start a new life surrounded by Michael, his family, and true friends. 6 months ago, still wrapped in the joy of accepting Michael's proposal, Elizabeth had visited her childhood home to share the good news with her family. Her parents had shed tears of joy and planned a dinner to formally welcome Michael into the family. But Victoria had been absent, having messaged that she would be late due to a party with friends, which Elizabeth hadn't thought much of at the time. The following week, Elizabeth met Victoria at a cafe. She intended to tell her sister about the engagement in person and ask her to be a bridesmaid. As she waited with coffee, Victoria arrived 20 minutes late. Typical. "Congratulations," Victoria said brightly. "Someone finally chose you." Elizabeth ignored the sardonic remark and began talking about wedding plans. However, Victoria's attitude gradually changed. What appeared on her face wasn't joy, but rather some sort of malicious satisfaction. "Michael is really wonderful, isn't he?" Victoria said, stirring her coffee. "Those eyes, those lips, especially amazing in bed." Elizabeth's hands trembled. "What are you saying? You don't know." Victoria feigned surprise. "Last month, I spent some intimate time with Michael. I met him to discuss something for you, but after a few drinks, well, you can guess the rest." Elizabeth felt as if she could hear her world crumbling. "That's a lie." Hilton Hotel, room 1422. "Check for yourself if you don't believe me." Victoria held out her smartphone, showing a photo of a hand holding a hotel room key card. Elizabeth rushed out and called Michael. Her voice was shaking. "We need to talk right now." An hour later, Michael sat in Elizabeth's apartment, his face pale. "Tell me the truth," Elizabeth said, trying to maintain her composure. Michael took a deep breath and cradled his head in his hands. "That day, Victoria contacted me. She said she wanted to plan a surprise for your birthday. We were having drinks and discussing it, but the next thing I remember is waking up in a hotel room with a headache." "What happened?" Elizabeth's voice trembled. "Honestly, I barely remember anything." "Like she said, something might have happened," Michael said painfully. "But please believe me. If I had been conscious, I would never have done such a thing. I love you. Only you." Elizabeth silently stared out the window. Rain pounded the glass, seeming to reflect the storm in her heart. "Can we check the hotel's security cameras?" Michael suddenly suggested. "To see what condition I was in." A few days later, with the cooperation of the hotel's security manager, Elizabeth reviewed the surveillance footage. It showed Victoria practically dragging a clearly intoxicated Michael into the room. Further investigation revealed a high likelihood that some drug had been mixed into Michael's drink. A doctor's diagnosis also confirmed his memory loss from that night. After gathering all the evidence, Elizabeth made the final decision to trust Michael. He had been a victim. However, Victoria's betrayal left a deep wound in her heart. On the day of the engagement party, Elizabeth called Victoria into a separate room. "Don't come to the wedding," Elizabeth said quietly but firmly. "Don't ever be part of my life again." The blood drained from Victoria's face. "You're joking, right? We're family. Family doesn't betray each other." That night, when Elizabeth returned home, angry phone calls from her parents awaited her. Victoria had complained to them that Elizabeth had excluded her from the wedding over a minor argument. What kind of terrible daughter excludes her sister over such a trivial matter? Martha's voice shook with anger. "There are circumstances." "Victoria. No excuses." George grabbed the phone. "You're no longer family. Get out." The call ended, and Elizabeth was left on the edge of loneliness. Her parents hadn't even tried to learn the truth before cutting her off. The next day, her parents contacted all relatives, sending emails asking them to skip the wedding due to Elizabeth's selfish behavior. Elizabeth was hurt, but she didn't regret her decision. She was prepared to start a new life surrounded by Michael, his family, and true friends. On the morning of her wedding day, Elizabeth woke up in a quiet hotel room. Morning sunlight filled the room with soft light. In the adjacent room, her maid of honor Carol, a college friend, was already consulting with the hairstylist. Elizabeth sat on the bed and took a deep breath. She had long dreamed of this day, but complicated emotions swirled within her. A wedding was supposed to be the happiest day of one's life. But a wedding without family, that was far from what she had imagined. "Are you okay?" Carol asked worriedly as she entered the room. Elizabeth tried to smile, but at that moment, tears spilled out. Carol said nothing, just held her tightly. "A wedding without family," Elizabeth sobbed. "This isn't how it was supposed to be." "You have us," Carol said quietly. "Michael, his family, and your true friends. Blood ties aren't the only kind of family. People connected by heart are your real family." Elizabeth nodded slowly. Carol was right. 2 hours later, dressed in her wedding gown, she headed to the venue. The wedding venue was a garden wedding facility in a renovated old mansion on the outskirts of Boston. May sunshine poured down on the garden, where flowers of every color bloomed. Chairs were neatly arranged, with a white carpet stretching down the center aisle. From the preparation room window, Elizabeth watched guests arriving one after another. Michael's parents, his 3 siblings and their families, relatives. And her friends. But the family seats on the left remained empty. There was a knock at the door, and Michael's father, Charles, entered. He wore a warm smile. "Ready?" he asked gently. Michael had explained Elizabeth's situation to his parents. They decided without hesitation to support her, and Charles had volunteered to be her escort. "Yes, I'm ready," Elizabeth answered, holding back tears. Charles took her hand and smiled kindly. "From today, you're a member of our family. No matter what happens, we'll always be on your side." His words spread warmth through Elizabeth's heart. The music began, and the ceremony started. Elizabeth began walking down the aisle, supported by Charles's arm. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of joy at beginning a new life surrounded by people full of love. Michael waited for her at the altar. His eyes shone with love and determination. They exchanged vows and rings. When the minister declared, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," loud applause erupted from the audience. The reception was filled with smiles, music, and delicious food. Elizabeth and Michael shared their first dance and cut the cake. Love and blessings surrounded them. But occasionally, Elizabeth's eyes turned toward the entrance. Deep down, she harbored a small hope that her parents might change their minds and appear. But that hope wasn't fulfilled. As the night deepened and the party drew to a close, Michael took Elizabeth's hand and led her to a quiet place. "Any regrets?" he asked, looking into her eyes. Elizabeth shook her head. "I've never regretted choosing you." They embraced and shared a long kiss under the starry sky. This was their new beginning. 3 days after the wedding, Elizabeth and Michael returned from their honeymoon and were beginning to settle into their new home when the intercom suddenly rang. The monitor screen showed 3 faces wet with rain: her parents, Martha and George, and her sister Victoria. Their expressions were clearly distressed, seemingly in a state of panic. "What's going on?" Michael frowned. Elizabeth caught her breath. "It's my family." After hesitating, she opened the door. Her parents and Victoria standing at the entrance looked completely different from before, haggard and exhausted. Her mother Martha's eyes were red as if from crying, her father George's shoulders were drooping, and Victoria wore a frightened expression. "May we come in?" Martha asked in a trembling voice. Elizabeth silently invited them into the living room. In the heavy silence that filled the room, George spoke up. "We got a call from the Clarks." The Clarks, Elizabeth's father's uncle's family. "What did they say?" Elizabeth quietly asked. "Everything," George forced out the words. "That we asked them to skip your wedding. That we disowned you. And..." He turned a stern gaze toward Victoria. "About Michael and Victoria too." "What do you mean?" Elizabeth was confused. "But Victoria..." "We heard the truth from Michael," Martha interrupted. "John contacted him before the wedding to make sure he was being honest with you. John is our relative, the Clark's son." "John did?" "Yes. He met Michael and heard his side. And he heard everything, about Victoria's actions and why you didn't invite her to the wedding." Elizabeth gasped. She hadn't seen John in years, but he had been on her side. "He revealed it all at the family council," Martha continued. "Now all the relatives know the truth. And..." Her voice trembled. "Everyone is condemning us. We should have protected you, but we abandoned you. Without knowing the truth." "No, Mom," Victoria spoke up. "You might not have known the truth, but I did. It's all my fault." Her voice trembled, and silence filled the room again. Outside, the rain began to fall harder. "The family's reputation is rapidly declining," George said quietly. "Some relatives say they never want to hear the Brown name again. Our social standing as well. And most of all," Martha cut in, "we lost our precious daughter. We couldn't attend your wedding. That's what hurts the most." Tears glistened in her eyes. George, too, showed an emotional expression rarely seen. Elizabeth stood rooted to the spot. Various emotions mixed in her heart: anger, sadness, and a strange sense of relief. She looked at Michael. He nodded quietly, indicating that he would respect her decision. "I'll make some tea," Elizabeth finally said. "This is going to be a long conversation." The scent of bergamot wafted through the living room from the steaming cups of tea on the table. Elizabeth quietly picked up her cup and took a slow sip. Across from her sat her parents and sister, tensely awaiting her reaction. Michael had excused himself, saying he would be busy in the kitchen. This was a family matter. Wisely, he was giving Elizabeth and her family the space they needed. "First of all," George broke the heavy silence, "I want to apologize to you. As our daughter and as a person, we should have listened to your side of the story." Martha nodded at her husband's words and looked at Elizabeth with tearful eyes. "Your father is right. We judged without hearing what happened from your side and hurt you. I'm truly sorry." Elizabeth quietly studied her parents. Their apologies seemed sincere. But years of disappointment and recent pain wouldn't disappear easily. "Why did you believe Victoria's words without question?" Elizabeth asked quietly. "You've always taken her side, but did you think I would exclude my sister from my wedding without reason?" Her parents were at a loss for words and looked at each other. Years of family dynamics were condensed in this moment. "You were always so responsible," Martha said. "Victoria was more emotional and vulnerable. In our attempts to protect her, we didn't notice that you were being hurt." "You didn't just not notice," Elizabeth's voice was calm, but anger lurked beneath. "You didn't care. You always thought I'd be the good child, never saying anything, accepting everything." Silence filled the room. It was an undeniable truth. "You know what?" Elizabeth continued. "According to Michael's testimony, Victoria deliberately called him out, got him drunk, and took him to a hotel. A doctor's diagnosis confirms Michael's memory loss. He claims nothing actually happened, but Elizabeth stared at Victoria. Her sister lowered her head, shoulders trembling. "Tell the truth," Elizabeth said to her sister. "It's time to end all the lies." Victoria slowly raised her face. Her makeup was smeared with tears, and her usually confident expression was gone. "I really tried to seduce him," she admitted in a hoarse voice. "But he refused. No matter how many times I tried, he refused to betray you. So I used drugs." George inhaled sharply, and Martha covered her mouth with her hand. "Even after he lost consciousness, nothing happened," Victoria continued. "I couldn't do such a thing. Instead, I lied. To hurt you." "Why?" Elizabeth's voice trembled. "I was jealous," Victoria answered honestly for the first time. "You were always perfect, responsible. Our parents spoiled me, but they truly respected you. I got attention, but you were respected. And when a wonderful man like Michael chose you..." Her voice choked. "I tried to ruin your happiness because it was something I could never have. I'm deeply sorry." Silence spread through the room again. Elizabeth stared out the window, listening to the sound of rain gently tapping the glass. "Daughter," George said quietly, "can you forgive us?" Elizabeth slowly looked at her parents. In their eyes, she saw true regret and love. The pain of years of unfair treatment remained, but another feeling was budding in her heart, understanding and a little compassion. "Forgiving and forgetting are different things," Elizabeth said quietly. "I can give forgiveness, but trust is built over time. Our relationship will need time to heal." Martha and George gave small nods. It was the best answer they could expect. Elizabeth looked at Victoria. Her sister seemed smaller and more fragile than ever before. "As for you," Elizabeth's voice turned cold, "it's more complicated. I wasn't hurt because you tried to seduce Michael. If I didn't trust him, I wouldn't have married him. I was hurt because you deliberately tried to hurt me. Because you tried to destroy my happiness." Victoria nodded silently. There were no words to argue with. "I don't know if we can fully restore our relationship," Elizabeth continued. "But if you're truly trying to change, maybe it's worth trying at least." Michael quietly returned to the room. He stood beside Elizabeth and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Hungry?" he asked gently. "Dinner's ready." Elizabeth smiled up at him. How much strength his support gave her. "Would you all like to join us?" Michael invited her parents and Victoria. After a moment's hesitation, Martha answered, "If we're not intruding." "Family healing begins around the dining table together," Michael smiled kindly. They moved to the dining table. Conversation was awkward at first but gradually became more natural. Her parents tried to get to know Michael better, and he made no attempt to hide his love for Elizabeth. Victoria spoke little, quietly observing. When dessert time came, Elizabeth took Michael's hand and took a deep breath. "Actually, I have something to tell you," she looked around at her family. "What is it?" Martha asked anxiously. "Soon there will be 3 of us," Elizabeth said quietly. "We're expecting a baby." Tears welled in Martha's eyes, and George was too moved for words. Even Victoria showed a small smile. "Congratulations," Martha finally said. "From the heart." "Thank you," Elizabeth replied. There was a note of hope in her voice. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the sunset was shining through gaps in the clouds. It seemed a symbol of a new beginning. Elizabeth looked around at her family. Their relationship would never be the same as before. Wounds might heal with time, but scars would remain. Still, she felt that tonight they had taken a small step forward. 1 year later, in a quiet residential neighborhood on the outskirts of Boston. In the garden of Elizabeth and Michael's home, colorful flowers were in full bloom. On the lawn visible from the living room window, a cream-colored blanket was spread out, and on it, Elizabeth was playing with her 3-month-old daughter, Emma. "You're smiling, our little angel," Elizabeth gently kissed the baby's soft cheek. Emma looked up at her mother's face with an innocent smile. Her blue eyes were just like Michael's, but she had Elizabeth's gentle features. The doorbell rang, and Elizabeth picked up the baby and headed to the entrance. When she opened the door, her parents, Martha and George, were standing there. Martha's arms held a large stuffed animal and a handmade quilt. "Welcome," Elizabeth smiled as she invited her parents in. Over the past year, her relationship with her parents had gradually been mending. It hadn't been easy. The imbalanced family dynamics of many years couldn't change overnight. But her parents were genuinely trying to repair the relationship. They regularly visited Elizabeth and Michael and were even receiving counseling. And above all, they had undergone a true change with Emma's birth. "My precious granddaughter," Martha cradled Emma in her arms and gently rocked her. "Grandma's treasure." George placed his hand on his daughter's shoulder. "How are you doing?" "I'm fine, Dad," Elizabeth answered. "My new pastry creations are well received, and Michael is busy with his new menu." They went out to the garden and chatted over coffee, surrounded by green grass and colorful flowers. There was no tension like before. Instead, a comfortable peace flowed between them. It wasn't perfect, but it was definite progress toward healing. About Victoria, Martha said with some hesitation, "She's started a new job in Chicago." Elizabeth nodded quietly. Her relationship with Victoria was even more complex than with her parents. Victoria had eventually left Boston a few months later and moved to Chicago to start a new life. The distance was probably necessary for both her and the family. "She's apparently receiving counseling," Martha continued. "Seems like she's trying to face herself." Elizabeth didn't answer, but inwardly she was praying for her sister. The anger had gradually softened, but there was still a long way to go to regain trust. That night, after Emma had fallen asleep, Elizabeth sat on the porch with Michael, gazing at the twilight sky. "I was thinking," she said quietly, "a year ago around this time, right after the wedding. I thought everything had fallen apart." Michael took her hand. "And now? Now? I'm in a different place," Elizabeth replied. "Not perfect, but at least moving forward." As they were talking, a delivery arrived. A small package was left at the front door, and the deliveryman departed. When Elizabeth opened the package, inside were a tiny pair of baby shoes and a handwritten card. "To my beloved niece. Hoping your smile will someday forgive my mistakes. Victoria." Tears welled in Elizabeth's eyes. She still hadn't fully forgiven Victoria, but this simple gift contained her sister's heartfelt regret and desire to change. "Will you write back?" Michael gently asked. Elizabeth thought for a while, then slowly nodded. "Tomorrow, I'll write a short letter. I don't know if we can repair our relationship yet, but I don't intend to completely close the door either." Michael smiled and put his arm around his wife's shoulder. Family bonds may sometimes be damaged, but they never completely disappear. "Yes," Elizabeth agreed. "With love and time, wounds can gradually heal." They quietly watched the twilight. Stars had begun to shine one by one in the sky. The next morning, Elizabeth wrote a brief reply. "Thank you. Emma is growing healthy. Perhaps someday, you'll be able to meet her. For now, take care of yourself." Elizabeth. She sealed the envelope and dropped it in the mailbox. She didn't know what the future would bring. Complete reconciliation wasn't guaranteed. But today, she had taken a small step. It was a step of hope. Elizabeth returned home and leaned over her daughter's cradle. Emma was breathing peacefully in her sleep. Looking at her tiny fists and closed eyes with long lashes, Elizabeth smiled. "There's more love in your life than you can imagine right now," she whispered to her daughter. "And no matter what happens, we'll be by your side." Outside the window, the light of a new day poured down on the garden, and flowers that hadn't been there yesterday were beginning to bloom.